I had an incident that happened about a year ago that scared the shit out of me. For privacy reasons, the most I can tell you is that it happened in Indiana. This is a legit story. I'm not going to tell you that Bigfoot ran out of the woods and punched out one of my windows. I didn't box an evil leprechaun from another dimension to save my captured girlfriend. I just saw something that really freaked me out, and I feel like I have to share this. Before I tell you about the incident, I need to explain why my best friend's grandparents' neighborhood has always spooked me. I'll call my buddy Steve. Steve's grandparents lived about 25 minutes out of town. There are probably about 10 houses in the area. Each house is surrounded by ominous-looking trees. The jagged branches stick out like they are hands reaching out for you. It's kind of a swampy area with very little lighting around. The lack of lighting makes everything invisible in the woods surrounding the houses. It is literally straight out of a horror movie. This would be enough to scare some people, but there have also been some disturbing occurrences. A while ago, there was a man that was tied to a chair in an abandoned house, and someone set the house on fire. I was skeptical when Steve told me about it, but even his grandparents told me the same thing. One day, while driving to his grandparents' house, he showed me the burned remains of the house. As if that didn't give off enough bad vibes, a lady hung herself in her front yard after sending her kids to school one day. It's just a downright creepy/sketchy place to drive to at night. Steve had been staying at his grandma's house for about a week because his grandparents were visiting relatives in Arkansas. This provided the perfect chance to drink and basically do what we want. Now that you basically got the backstory, I'll get to what happened. Well, one night Steve texts me and asks if I wanted to come over and hang out. It was late November and a little after 10:30. It was late, but I'm a bit of a night owl, so I didn't mind. I told him to give me a few minutes and I'd head over. Assuming that he is still at his grandma's, I start heading that way. I drive all the way to his grandma's house and realize all of the lights inside the house were off. Confused, I whip out my phone and text Steve. Me. Hey, you are at your grandma's, right? Steve. Nope, my house. Me. If I just drove all the way out here, you could have told me. Steve. Sorry, man. Just hurry up and get over here. I got something I gotta tell ya. Steve had been trying to get with a girl he had liked for a long time. He's really bad with talking with the ladies though, so he'd been asking me for advice. That had to be what this was all about. I chuckled while shaking my head, put my car in reverse and called Steve a dumbass under my breath. I began to head back and then my phone rang. It was Steve. I answered it, and he began to give me some details about the girl's situation. I stopped at a four-way stop and listened to Steve ramble on and on. I sat there for some time listening to Steve get all pumped up about his recent success. I looked up to finally turn left and saw something. It appeared to be a shadow in the front yard of an old house. I had no clue someone even lived in the house. The shadow was very close to the road. Oh shit, some guy is standing in his front yard looking at me. I laughed. He's probably wondering why the hell I'm just sitting here at the stop sign. My car radio showed that I had been stopped at the stop sign for about 5 minutes, so I could imagine I seemed sketchy. I began to turn my car left. My headlights illuminated the shadow, and I became very serious. My headlights revealed an old lady standing there with her hands folded as if she was praying. She was looking down, and her mouth was moving quick. Couldn't make out anything she was saying at all. Her mouth was just moving 100 miles an hour and she seemed like she was in a trance. She was probably 5 feet from my car. I sat there and stared. It was probably 10 degrees outside, and all that she was wearing was a gray dress. My headlights were directly on her, and she didn't even look up. I didn't know what to do exactly. At first I was concerned for the old lady, but the more she stood there, the more the hairs stood on the back of my neck. Steve realized I hadn't said anything for a few minutes. Steve, you still there? Me. Dude, this old lady is just standing here. Steve. What is she doing? Ha. Me. She's just praying. Right by the road. Steve. What the hell? It's almost midnight. Is she okay? Me. I think. I don't know. I really don't want to ask. She looks almost possessed the way she's standing there. I'm afraid if I drive, though, she might run in front of my car. She's not even looking at me. She's just wearing this dress out here too. Think I'm just going to try to slowly drive past her. She's almost on the road where I have to turn though. Slowly start to attempt to go by her. I hit my brakes, slightly afraid that she'd run out in front of me. As I slowly start driving by, she is literally inches from my passenger window. She didn't budge. Her mouth never quit going either. Never even acknowledged me. I still couldn't hear what she was muttering, but I didn't want to roll my window down to find out. Steve spoke into the phone and he seemed worried. Steve, wait, turning. Where are you? Me? I'm at the four-way stop right by your grandma. Steve, dude, that lady hung herself there. Get out of there. My stomach sank and I smashed the gas pedal. I drove about 80 till I got close till town. I was so scared that my voice became shaky on the phone. When I arrived at Steve's, I told him everything I saw. We were both in disbelief. Suddenly, I became very nervous. Every scary movie you ever see usually involves the demon or ghost following the person to their home. I stayed at Steve's house for 2 nights and nothing happened. I began to dread going to sleep at my house, but when I finally did, everything still was normal as usual. There was one occurrence when Steve had to grab something at his grandma's, so I rode with him. On the way back, it looked like there was a lady walking around in a dress, but Steve took no chances and blew past the stop sign, so we really couldn't tell. As of now, there is nothing more to add to the story, whether it was the lady's ghost, demon, or just some really weird old lady that decided to pray by the road at midnight in 10-degree weather. It scared the shit out of me. Hopefully it was the last one. Now I take a different way to Steve's grandma's if I go there at night. Just remember, if you guys somehow stumble upon the same neighborhood, don't stop for the old lady. Don't stop driving late at night. It all started late last night. About once a month I visit my parents for the weekend, who live about 4 hours away from me. It is a quiet, peaceful drive through remote rural roads, so I don't mind how often I drive them. Last night the drive was like many others, with the only exception being that I left later than usual. It was dark for the majority of the drive, and I didn't return home until almost midnight. That being said, it was a nice drive, although I could see lightning flashing in the distance from a far-off storm that I seemed to be following. About 2 hours in, on the most remote section, thought I saw something in the distance. I am always afraid of deer or moose, so I tend to slow right down at the slightest sign of life. As I approached, I was shocked to see what appeared to be a person lying on the side of the road. I slammed the car to a stop and ran out to see if they were all right. As I drew close, I could clearly see it was a girl, who appeared to be in her 20s, with dark black hair and torn, muddy clothing. I called out to her, "Are you okay?" There was no answer or sign of movement. I quickly crouched down and put my fingers to her neck as I had seen on TV, trying to check for some signs of vitals. Nothing. Grabbed her wrists, trying for a different pulse, and was shocked at how cold her skin felt. With a sinking feeling, I knew I was too late. Her face was turned away at an odd angle, and so I gently reached out and turned it towards me, and knew for sure she was gone as soon as I saw her eyes. They stared back at me, unblinking. For a moment it appeared as though a flash of sentience still shone in them, but it quickly faded, leaving dull, glassy eyes staring at me through the darkness. Reached for my phone, ready to dial 911. I briefly hesitated. Do I still call 911 when the person is already dead? Do I call the local police phone number instead? Technically, it's not an emergency anymore. Shaking my head at myself, I dialed 911. Police, fire, or ambulance? The reassuring voice said on the other end. Police or ambulance? I'm not sure. What is the emergency? She inquired. Well, I was out driving, and there is a girl at the side of the road, but I think she's already dead. She has no pulse, her skin is cold, and she is unresponsive. I spoke quickly, almost stumbling over my words as I was understandably feeling a little unnerved. I quickly gave the operator my location and pertinent details. Police and ambulance are on their way. Are there any signs of injury on her? The woman asked. Quickly checked. No, she is only muddy, and her clothing is torn, I replied. It took me aback, as I hadn't realized until that moment how strange it was that a girl should be out here in the middle of nowhere, dead with no signs of injury. As I looked around at the darkness, I began to feel nervous, and decided to wait in my car, still speaking with the operator. The police showed up fairly quickly, and the officers asked me a few short questions before I was allowed to continue on my journey. As I continued driving, I tried to shake off the events of the night, but as I was driving through darkness with no means to distract myself, I understandably found it hard to forget. I finally arrived home, ready to go straight to bed. A little embarrassed, I left the hallway light on outside my door. It may seem silly, but it was my first experience even seeing a dead body, and I was feeling a little creeped out. Normally my roommates would help me feel secure, but both were gone at the moment, and the apartment felt strange and empty without them. I fell asleep fairly quickly, but suddenly woke up around 2:30 a.m. It took me a second to realize why everything felt wrong. The hallway light, which I had purposefully left on to shine some light in the room, was out. As I realized this, I felt a chill take over my body as I lay in the darkness, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Slowly, I began to see shapes in the darkness, and reassured myself that everything was ok. I saw my desk take shape, and my dresser, my yoga mat rolled into a ball, gave me a fright, until I realized what it was. However, I slowly came to realize that there was one shape I couldn't place. In the middle of the room was a dark, humped shape, taking up the center of the floor. I racked my brain as my body froze in fear and my heart pounded, trying to think what it was I could have left there. It was only as I saw two glimmers in it that I realized it was exactly the shape of the girl last night, in the curled up position she had been left in on the side of the road, and the glimmers were exactly where her eyes would have been. I was driving home one night after meeting some friends for some late-night Waffle House the week after the spring break of my freshman year in college at the state university I lived near. Mike and his brother Ben had gone to school out of state, and their spring break was that week, so we were hanging out around my work and class schedule while they came home for their break. Alex had stayed local as well, and was going to community college nearby before transferring to the university I was going to. Mike and Ben had just gotten back home after their 3-hour drive, and we all met at the restaurant around 10 that night. We talked and had fun after not seeing each other for a while. It was nice to catch up with them after not seeing them for a few months. I was living at home and commuting, so my mother called me around 1:45 and told me I should head home because my father had work the next day and didn't want to be woken up by me coming home at some ungodly hour of the morning. We all got up, paid for our meals and coffee, and left. We talked as we walked out to our cars and went our separate ways just as we always did, and I started on my way home. I took a slightly longer route home because I didn't do much night driving, and I was still a bit of a new driver, so doing things like actually getting to use my brights were still amusing. When I got to a wooded section of the road home, I was surprised to realize how dark it was. I had been driving with street lights up to that point, but there weren't any there, and with the night being new moon, everything but the road in front of me and my dashboard was pitch black. I had my windows down for the short time I had been driving and was surprised at how cold it had gotten because it had been rather warm out when I had left the restaurant. But North Carolina weather never makes sense, as every resident of the state knows. I had just rolled my windows up when I got to the turn in the road. I was passing through it when I saw something brown immediately ahead of me, so I slammed on my brakes and stopped just short of what looked like an animal that had just been hit by another car. In the short glimpse I had gotten, it looked like a deer laying on its side with its legs splayed haphazardly and some dark patches of blood in its fur. I was just reaching for my door handle to get out and see what it was when the thing stood up in front of me and ran into the woods. But before it ran, it looked into my car and locked eyes with me. You know how they say deer have dead eyes? That they've just got cold, expressionless faces. I had seen that before, and this was different. I swear this thing was staring into my soul in the most gut-wrenchingly horrifying way possible. It looked like it had been hit by multiple cars with how grossly injured it seemed. But as it stood up, it was gone with its horrible, jerking gait that reminded me of Gollum from the Lord of the Rings series. I sat for a few moments with a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. But I knew I wasn't getting out of my car to follow that thing. So I started driving again. The road was still dark for a few miles, and I thought I saw a shape in my rear-view mirror a few times. But I told myself I was just seeing things because I had been pretty scared by that creature that I was slowly convincing myself was just a maimed deer. I reached a stoplight that had long been empty for the evening, but I took the time to search through the local radio stations to find some music to listen to. I was in the middle of a large static eye gap between stations when my whole car was rocked by something hitting it from behind. My head spun around and my body went numb as I saw the creature slam into my rear window, slide over my roof, and land in front of me. I stared. I couldn't make my body do anything. I don't even think I breathed as I watched that thing for what had to have been only a few seconds as it slowly stood up and locked eyes with me. Its brown fur was matted with blood. Some of the flesh on its rib cage had been torn away to the bone. Its legs all bent at awkward angles, and it still had those soul-sucking, dead eyes. It took a step towards the car, and every atom in my body screamed, "Run!" with all the force they could muster. No longer acknowledged that the light was still red as I floored my gas pedal, swerving around the thing and seeing it still stare at me as I sped away. I was going faster than I ever thought my 2000 Impala could go as I swerved around country road corners and tore past the entrances to driveways. I have no idea just how fast I was going because every part of my body was still screaming at me to get as far away from that thing as I could. Eventually reached an area with streetlights, and I saw it following me from about 200 feet behind. I was hysterical. I had no idea what that monster was, but knew in my bones that if I stopped it would kill me. So I kept speeding down the road and frantically called my parents because I had no idea what to do. My mother was the first one to answer my calls. She tells me that call was one of the most horrible things she's ever heard. I screamed into the phone, "Mom, this thing is chasing me. I don't know what to do. It's horrible. It wants to kill me. It's keeping up with the car. Wake up, Dad. Tell him to get one of the guns because I don't know what I'm doing. And it wants to get me. Please, Mom, help." And at that point, the call ended with the first ear-splitting scream that the thing made. I dropped my phone out of surprise, and the call ended. I wasn't navigating home with my conscious thoughts because they were being dominated by an overwhelming feeling of sheer terror. It screeched again with its guttural, nails-on-a-chalkboard shriek that I still hear sometimes as I'm dozing off to sleep. It seemed like an eternity of flying down the road with radio static blaring over my speakers and the screams of the thing following behind me. I made it home after that hellish eternity behind the wheel and squealed to a halt in my driveway with the bumper of my car ending up 6 inches into our front bushes. jumped out of the car and left the driver's door open as I sprinted into the house and nearly dove through the front door. I was just beginning to scream for my father to shut the door when the police arrived. My parents couldn't give the police any more information than me saying something was trying to kill me, so they dispatched quite a few squad cars to the house. The mass of flashing red and blue lights and small army of police officers in front of my house didn't help, but they managed to calm me down, get my statement, photograph the car, and say that there didn't seem to be any immediate threat to my safety anymore, so they left for the evening. That was it. I laid in bed that night staring at my ceiling, expecting that thing to come crashing through my bedroom window at any moment and gore me with its antlers or beat me with its shattered legs. But it didn't, and the next few days went by with no incidents and me making a point to only drive during daylight hours. The police said I must have hit someone that night, because the damage to my car was consistent with me hitting something, not being hit from behind. They found a body on that turn that they say was a drunk that must have stumbled out into the road in front of me as I drove by. My therapist says it was all some form of coping mechanism, because I can't handle the guilt of knowing that I killed someone, that it's all in my head as some way to cover up what truly happened because I'm suppressing the memory. But I know what I saw, and I know what I still see every time I drive at night. If you enjoyed today's stories, leave a comment below. It'll help me a ton. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.